All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Claire Bradley, and I am the Director of Irish Studies here at the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. As I said, this session is being recorded and it'll be made available afterwards on YouTube. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'll just put it onto the slideshow. Okay. So in this session, we are going to look at some maps of Ireland and we're going to look at some land divisions, which you need to know when you're researching Irish ancestors in different record sets, because not all of the records that we look at were created in the same way. Some of them used one form of land division, some use a different form. Some were civil divisions and some were church divisions. The first thing, and I'm going to go very basic here, but I think it's important to start with some very basic things. The first thing to understand is that the island of Ireland has two legal jurisdictions on it. The island was partitioned following the War of Independence in 1922, and we have two jurisdictions. At the top, we have Northern Ireland, which comprises 6 counties: Antrim, Down, Derry or Londonderry, Tyrone, Fermanagh and Armagh. And they're all in the province of Ulster. There are some other counties in Ulster. I'll get into that in a minute. And then the rest of the country, which characteristically on this map is in green, is the Republic of Ireland. So there's 26 other counties and they're all in the Republic. Now, the important point in mentioning that is that when you begin to research your ancestors in Ireland, you need to know which is the modern jurisdiction for research purposes. When you're looking at historic records, it's not going to matter. Everything is going to cover the whole island. But you may get to a point where you need to do research on the ground in Ireland. And that will inform whether you're using records that are held in Northern Ireland or records that are held in the Republic of Ireland. So the two main repositories, I've got them down here at the bottom. For Northern Ireland, there is something called PRONI, which is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. And that is their URL there. It's a mountain of a URL. I think they could really shorten that. And then in the Republic, we have the National Archives of Ireland, which has a much shorter and obvious URL. So when you're looking at records, that might be a very important point to begin with. Many of the other records you look at, they're not so relevant to know which one it is, but it's just always important to know. So the second point is that we have 4 provinces in Ireland. Now, province is a historic term, and it doesn't have too much relevance in day-to-day usage in modern day Ireland. But the 4 provinces are Ulster, Leinster, Connacht, and Munster. And sometimes you see Connacht spelt with an A-U-G-H-T at the end as well. It's kind of an old-fashioned way, but the modern spelling is Connacht, like that. Now, I'm just going to go through what's in each of the 4 provinces for you. This is always helpful for people to understand the pronunciation as well. So the top of Ireland in the north is Ulster. And as I said, Northern Ireland is entirely in Ulster, but there are 3 other counties which are not in Northern Ireland. They're in the Republic, but they're still in Ulster. You might, if you follow Gaelic Athletic Association football or hurling in Ireland, they always talk about the provinces in the different championships, but that's the only thing that I can think of in day-to-day use. So in Ulster, we have Antrim, Armagh, Cavan, Derry, Donegal, which is one I often hear people mispronouncing, Down, Fermanagh, Monaghan, and Tyrone, not Tyrone, Tyrone. In Connacht, which is in the west, we have Galway, Leitrim, Mayo, Roscommon, and Sligo. So that's the smallest province of Ireland. And there's a famous phrase that comes from the time of plantations where people were told to conform to the Church of Ireland, the Protestant religion, or get off their land. And they would say to hell or Connacht. And that it implied that Connacht was not a good place to be, which is not fair to Connacht at all. Some of the most beautiful parts of Ireland are there. And then we have Munster in the south, which has Clare, Cork, Kerry, Limerick, Tipperary, and Waterford. So some of the biggest counties in Ireland are in Munster. So even though it only has a small number, it actually is a very large part of Ireland. And of course, most of the Irish people who were leaving from Ireland would have left from the bottom of Cork here in Cove, which was known as Queenstown in the past. I'll do another lecture another day about talking about how place names have changed in Ireland, but there wasn't time to cover it in today's session. And then lastly, we have Leinster, which is has the most counties in it, and it has, of course, very important, the capital of Ireland, Dublin. Northern Ireland's capital is Belfast, which is here, and Dublin is the Republic's capital. We've got Carlow, Dublin, Kildare, Kilkenny, Laois, that's a hard one to say, Longford, Louth, Meath, so they have a D sound rather than a T sound. Offaly, Westmeath, Wicklow, and Wexford. So that is our 32 counties that we have in Ireland. Now, when it comes to civil land divisions, and what I mean by civil is something that was created by the government or the state rather than the church. There are many different land divisions, and I've just chosen to focus on a few of them here today rather than going through every single one because it's only a short session. So the smallest unit of land measurement in Ireland is called a townland. And a townland is a number of acres. Now, it is not a specific number of acres, it is a few hundred acres. So it might be 253, it might be 300. It is not a precise measurement. The acreage, of course, is a precise measurement, but the townland itself is not. Now, many records use the townland as the way that you would find a particular place if you're not looking for a name of a person. And two important ones that we use a lot for Irish genealogy are two mid-century census substitutes for the 19th century. And you may be aware that in the Civil War that followed the independence and the partition of Ireland, the Public Records Office in Dublin, which was then in the Four Courts, was destroyed in a fire. Now, historians will differ over whether it was done on purpose or an accident, but the result is the same. Many records were destroyed that encompassed the 700 years of British rule in Ireland that had happened at that point. The main losses for historians and genealogists were the early 19th century censuses. So from the first few, not some of the later ones were not actually destroyed by fire, but they were destroyed for other reasons. And they also destroyed a lot of Church of Ireland records and wills and testamentary records. Now, the wills and testamentary records are a huge loss, but very many people in Ireland in the past did not keep wills. So it is not the case that everybody's ancestor would have had a will and that was destroyed. It's also true that most people in Ireland were not members of the Church of Ireland. So their records that were lost were not the same loss as they would have been if they had been Catholic records, where most people were Catholics. So those records are the main areas that we look at in genealogy that are lost. And so when we come to look at other records to substitute for those censuses, we look at things we've never ever have looked at in our lives otherwise. And the two main things are called the Tithe, the Plotting Books, and Griffiths Valuation. Both of those are actually records that involved valuing and surveying land so that people could be taxed accurately on that land. Now I say accurately, but actually that's not true at all in the Tithe, the Plotting Books case. The tithes were a tax that people had to pay to the Church of Ireland, and they had to pay them regardless of whether they were a member of the Church of Ireland or of another faith. So they were enormously unpopular, as you can imagine. They were also very unfair. People who had a garden and could afford to maintain a garden and a gardener didn't have to pay a tax on that grassland, but people who were looking after 2 fields of potatoes did have to pay a tax on that. And it also didn't apply in urban areas. So it's very unfair, and it was deeply unpopular. And that's why it didn't last very long, because people refused to pay it. But when you're looking at those tithe books, you need to know what's the townland that you're interested in for your ancestor. And in this period, it's also important to consider that the spelling might be more than one way. Spelling is more codified in the modern era. In the early 19th century, it absolutely was not. So think about other ways. And I have a place to show you that gives you townland spellings on another slide in a minute. The other record that we use instead of the census that requires the townland is Griffiths Valuation, which is more correctly known as the primary valuation of Ireland. And that is a mid-century survey of land they did do their best to make it fair and equitable for everybody. And it's named after a man called Richard Griffiths, who was in charge of the project. And you can see that it covered a very long time, 1847 to 1864. So it has a nice overlap with the beginning of civil records, which started in 1864 for the whole country. So you use the townland in both of these cases. So that is an important land division to be sure of. The other point about townlands to make is that there could be more than one place with the same name. And so that is why it is important. That's why I'm showing you the counties and the provinces, and I'm going to show you some other divisions as well. So that if there is more than one place with the same name, I'll give you an example. Newcastle, there'd be many places called Newcastle in Ireland, or I think there's 7 places called Blackrock in Ireland, and 2 of them would be relatively famous. There's a Blackrock suburb of Dublin and another one in Cork City. But there are 5 other places called Blackrock in Ireland. And if you know that your ancestor came from Blackrock, you want to make sure that you're researching the right Blackrock. You don't want to waste your time researching the one that's somewhere else. So that's why you got to know how to situate these things in their geographical locations. Another important one that's relevant for the census, and it's a little bit less relevant perhaps because you can, of course, search the census with a name, is the district electoral division. And we still use that division in Ireland today when we're looking at elections and voting and so on. And so when you look at the census, and there's very many places you can look at the census online, you can use the National Archives website for it, which is the original place, but you can also search it on Ancestry and Find My Past and Family Search and MyHeritage. If you're looking at someone and there's many people with the same name, well, then you might want to know what is the district electoral division, that interest that is relevant for your party. And this is also particularly true when you were looking at the big cities. So in Dublin, in Belfast, in Cork in particular, you might find lots of people with the same name and you don't know which is your guy. But you might know, oh, I know that they lived on the south side of the city, or I know that they lived on the north side of the city. And so you can look and see, well, is this a DED that's on the north side or is it on the south side? Of course, you're always going to have maps open beside you, and I'm going to show you some places that you'll get some really good maps as well. Another important division is the Poor Law Union. Now, a little bit of background on what that means. In 1838, in the UK, which Ireland was a part of, they created the first attempt at social welfare with the Poor Law Acts. And these were workhouses. So people would go to the workhouse if they were destitute. They also used it as hospitals, as a place that they could get medicine or medical care. And it also provided work for people. So they were not a good place to be. Nobody wanted to be in the workhouse. But they developed a system that they mapped the whole country, and they did it in England and Wales and Scotland too. And each area had a workhouse as part of it. And it became, sometimes you hear the phrase union workhouse, and that's what the union means, in that it's the Poor Law Union. So they mapped the country, and I've got a map of those, a link to a map of those for you. And each one had a workhouse. Many of the workhouse buildings still exist today. Some of them have been turned into hospitals in the modern era. And so they had this Poor Law Union system from 1838. And then superseding that, but mapping to the same system, when they started to bring in civil registration. 1837 in England and Wales, they started registering births, deaths and marriages. In Scotland, they did it from 1855. And in Ireland, we did it a little bit differently. And that is because the Catholic Church didn't want to get involved in helping in setting this up. And so they there was a period where the system was up and running in the other parts of the UK and it wasn't running in Ireland. And it started on a very limited level in 1845 with the registration of non-Catholic marriages. So that's everybody who's not a Catholic. So it includes Church of Ireland people, it would include Jewish people and so on. But when they came to go, okay, we need to register everybody's birth, death and marriage, how will we divide up the country? They said, let's use the Poor Law Union system that's already in place. We already know what the boundaries of those places are. So officially the districts for civil registration are called Superintendent Registrar Districts, and that is abbreviated to SRD on the main website that we use, irishgenealogy.ie. But you do also, in common terms, hear them called registration districts. That's what most people will call them. And they are exactly the same as the poor law union. So if you see, oh, I know they were in the workhouse in Balrotherry in North County Dublin, well, then you should also know that if you're looking for a death of someone in that workhouse, you're looking for them in the Balrotherry union, the Balrotherry registration district. So they're exactly the same. So if you see a map of one, you can be confident that it is also a map of the other. Those divisions, I'm going to show you a place where you can find a map of those in a minute. So, important point about the poor law union / the registration district is that they might cover places that sound like they are a county, but they won't cover all of that county. So, for example, and I always like to give this example, Limerick. There's an SRD called Limerick, and you might think, oh, that's County Limerick. And it does cover most of Limerick, but there are also parts of Limerick that tip into other registration districts, which don't sound like they're in Limerick. So there's Kilmallock, Rathkeale, Croom, Glynn, Mitchelstown, Newcastle, and Tipperary. So you might be familiar with some of those are not even a part of Limerick, they're totally different counties. But you wouldn't necessarily think to look for someone who lived in Limerick in a registration district called Tipperary, would you? But it does actually cover it. Similarly, there's one called Cork, but it's actually one of, I think, 17 districts in Cork. So if you looked for someone in Cork and only selected Cork, and thought, oh, I can't find them. Well, that would be a mistake, because they could be in Skibbereen, they could be in Macroom, they could be in Kinsale, they could be in Bandon, they could be in one of the other Cork registration districts. So this map, it's important to consider the county map beside this union map, because you might need to look at one beside what you think is relevant, or someone might live just on the border between two, and it might be that they've got some records registered in one district and some registered in another district. So important to know what's around you in these cases. Now, let's have a look at a couple of church divisions, and these are a little bit easier to understand. So when we're talking about both the Catholic Church and the Church of Ireland, they both use the terms parish and diocese. And so a parish is an area which is for the particular region. It might have more than one church in it, but one of them will be the head church and the others will be called a chapel of ease. Now, it's not always easy to tell which one is the head church, and the parish name will be a geographical name. You can see here on the right, I've got a map which I've taken from the National Library's parish register map, which is a lovely collection. And you can see here that they've got the parish boundaries listed out. So there's an example of Lismore, which is a big parish in Waterford. So this here is the border between Cork and Waterford. And so there's Lismore. But can you imagine that if you live down here in Lismore and say there's a church over here, you might go to that church rather than the one over here in Lismore because it's closer to you. So you might baptize your children down here in Knockanore rather than in Lismore, even though technically you live in the parish of Lismore. So when you're looking at church records, it's very important to get a sense of what other parishes are nearby and how close to that parish boundary does your family live. Because, you know, people didn't have vehicles in the past. Sometimes they didn't have horses. They were walking to these locations. They wanted it to be close by. And they weren't going, oh, hang on now, I'm supposed to be in Cappoquin Parish, I must go to the church in Cappoquin. That's not the way it worked. So then a diocese is a group of parishes, quite simply, and there's a bishop in charge of the diocese. And the only reason you might need to know the diocese is if there is, and there is, I'm going to spoiler alert, there is, if there's more than one place with the same name, and there definitely is. So when you look at this this website for the parish registers collection, it when you start to type in a name, it prompts you with options, and if you give that a go, you'll see that in brackets it'll say Diocese of Dublin, Diocese of Ferns, diocese of something else. So it's a good idea for you to have a sense of what diocese is relevant for your particular area, just in case there's more than one place with that name, which there could well be. And with the Church of Ireland, it's a similar setup, except that there's not as nice a map that I can show you here. And sometimes the parish in the Church of Ireland has the same name as the civil parish. So there's also a civil parish concept, and this is an administrative division, and it's often the same name as the Church of Ireland parish. But confusingly, you do get some parishes that have the same name in the Church of Ireland and the Catholic Church. So, for example, in Dublin, there is both a Catholic and a Protestant St. Mickens parish. And they're basically in the same area as well. So that's an important distinction to know. The parish boundaries, when it comes to the churches, don't consider whether they knock over a county boundary. So a parish could easily be across two counties as well. So you can see why you need to have all of these different divisions, if not in your head, at least made a note of, because you might be hopping around looking at parish records, you might be looking at civil records at the same time, you might be looking at the census if you're in the 20th century, and you need to know that each of the places that you're looking at is the same location so that you can be sure that you're going to find, if they're there, what you're looking for. I hope that makes sense. So another important point, and I see this a lot when I help people from other countries with their Irish ancestors, is I want you to consider that Ireland is a small place. So it's a population of 5 million in the Republic today and about 1.5 million in Northern Ireland. And it's a very small, I have the square miles and the square kilometers there for you. You can see it's under 33,000 square miles. It's a small place. People didn't move around that much in the past unless they were leaving, and then obviously they did. But if there are record locations and they're more than about 15 miles apart, I think it's unlikely that they're going to be the same people. I was talking to somebody who we thought we might be related, and he had relations who lived in Wexford. And I had relations with the same name who lived in Wexford. And he had a baptism attached to this family for somewhere up in Westmeath. And I said to him, that is 150 kilometers from the place that we know our family lived in, or I know my family lived in. And unless you have a really good explanation as to why that would be right, I'm just going to rule it out immediately on the basis of it's too far away. Now, there might well be a good historical reason. I was able to find a good example of this with somebody who they were in a place where the landlord decided he was going to clear the land. And so everybody moved. And I found the family in one place, and then I thought, oh, is this them over here? It's a bit too far. And then when I looked into the historical context, it made sense. So if there is a logical reason why someone has moved, well, then that's okay. But if you just found something that looks like it's the right name, but they're not that near where you know your people were, think again. I mean, don't completely discount it. Of course, there could always be an anomaly of a reason, but more than likely, it's not going to be the same people if it's quite distant. Now your exception here is, of course, that people migrated, and your standard migration pattern is that somebody lives in a very rural area. They might move into a small village, and from that small village they might move to a bigger town or into a city, and then ultimately to a new country. And that might even be a three-step process. They might move from Kildare up to Dublin, and then they might work in Dublin for a time, and then they might go on the boat across to Liverpool in the UK, and then ultimately they might take a boat from Liverpool to America. So that would be a standard migration pattern. So if you find people and they've moved from one place to another as a family unit, and you might be able to establish that they are the same people in each place. But generally speaking, if there's not an obvious reason why someone would be in one distant place and then a new different place, it's probably not the same people. But because Ireland looks so small, particularly to Americans and Canadians, they sometimes make the mistake that this must be the same people because, oh, it's only 100 miles apart. And that's an enormous distance in Ireland. So it's very unlikely. So I just want to underline that. And before we get into some questions, I just want to go into some URLs for you of places to find maps and to use these types of divisions. So I want to highlight the website of Shane Wilson, who has an excellent collection of maps and several really good tools to figure out which division works in which location and which type of record set. And he also includes an online version of something called the 1851 Townland Index, which was an attempt to codify all of the townlands in Ireland following the 1851 census. And that's where you're going to get a good spelling of the name. in it, and that is also published as a book, but Shane's got a nice database of it, so it's nice, easy to interrogate. And it gives you then in the format, in the return, it'll give you the Townland, it gives you the Poor Law Union, it gives you the registration district, it gives you a couple of other references, and it tells you what county. So this is a really good place to look at and see, oh, is there two places with the same name, and which is the one that's relevant for me? I showed you a little snip there of the National Library's parish register collection, and their map is lovely on it. And I always enjoy having a look at what are the parishes around the parish that I'm interested in. And they also have images of those parish records. They are not transcribed, they're just images, but both Ancestry and Find My Past have a transcription of those records, and it is free to use on Find My Past with you don't have to have a subscription, you just have to have a user account, but Ancestry makes you pay on their subscription to use it, which is cheeky of them. Then another one that's very good, and this belongs to the Ordnance Survey of Ireland. This is the Irish Townland and Historical Map Viewer. So the Ordnance Survey in Ireland got going at the same time as Griffiths Valuations in the 1820s and 30s. They began work, and they have different historic maps which you can overlay with the modern map, which is really nice. And I love to look at that. Another one that's great is historic townland information on townlands.ie. Now, this is for the Republic only, and it will link also into the census and Griffiths Valuation directly to that parish for you from that site, which is a really nice tool. Prony in Northern Ireland also has a great historical maps collection, and they have got details on townlands and so on as well. And lastly, I want to link to John Grenham's website. You may be familiar with John Grenham. He's another professional genealogist, and he's got a very good map of the poor law unions, which are the same as the registration districts, on his website. I'd love someone to produce a really nice map of that I could have. I have a nice printout on my wall beside me that I use as a quick reference, but I'd love a nice one that I could frame. There are lots of really old ones, of course, that are really far too big to display on a modern house wall. Lastly, I want to mention a book. Yes, an actual book that you would have to buy, but it's a really good one to have on your shelf. It's called The New Genealogical Atlas of Ireland by a guy called Brian Mitchell, who is from Derry in Northern Ireland. The second edition is the one that you want, and it has maps by county of the Roman Catholic parishes, the Protestant parishes. It also details things to do with the Presbyterian Church. It has registration districts. It's a very nice selection of maps by county, and it's a nice guide to have a look at. They're just nice black and white maps with numbers and then a list down the side, and it's a particularly good reference. I use that all the time. So that is everything I wanted to cover in this short session. I'm just going to stick my contact details up there for a minute, and then we are going to take some questions. And of course, they don't have to be on today's particular topic. If there's something you want to fire at me, I'll give it a go, but I will reserve the right to say I have no idea. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm open to hearing questions.
There is a comment by, and I'm trying to get to that comment. It says Townsland's, it's by Joanne Boyd.
Oh, you think that, Joanne? Okay, I might be wrong there. I know that Northern Ireland has its own version of that site, and that's why I linked to the Prony maps as well. But it could be that they've expanded it. But I thought it was, I might be wrong, of course. Happy to be corrected.
Okay, I had a question while other people are thinking of. You can unmute and turn on your camera and ask questions, or you can pop it in the chat and we'll catch it and answer for you. The question I had was, you were sharing some of the maps with S. Wilson.
Yes.
They have layover maps for this.
So Shane's website uses Google Maps, so it does work with that. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really like it when you can see the layers, and then you can look at the satellite image as well to see what do they look like right now. You know, you have that little "who do you think you are" moment, at least on the internet.
I also like it if you can lay them over top of each other so you have the boundary lines.
Yes,
you know,
because of course those things do change a little bit over time, and that's nice to know. Anyone else got any questions?
Maria?
I have a question.
Okay, so we'll take Maria first, and then we'll go with Diane.
Thank you so much. This has been so informative. I'm just wondering, with the family name of Smith, and relatives from the Kells, County Meath area, how far back might I hope to go in terms of records, at least in the 1800s? Or am I looking at something that's really going to be sort of a nail in a needle in a proverbial haystack? Thank you.
Do you know when your ancestors left Ireland?
Oh, actually, so my mom only came over like in the mid-50s,
Oh, okay,
1950s.
okay.
So
Right.
yeah,
Okay. Right. Okay.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that see that informs the answer. Yes. So you're almost certainly going to be able to get back to the middle of the 19th century. So the famine decade of the 1840s you should relatively easily. Now, not on every single line, because there might be just something that you just don't have the information on. But for most people, we can get back to about the famine decade. And then it becomes a little bit more difficult because the records, you have to leap into the church records. And the church records for the Catholic Church really only got going in the 1820s and the 1830s. And that's because they were subject to penal laws, which means that they didn't have religious freedom to practice. And it didn't stop them from practicing their religion, but it did stop them from writing it down. Because if they wrote down, oh, that the priest baptized the baby over there the other day, they might get in trouble about it. So they didn't write it down. And so the vast majority of the country were, of course, Catholic. And so that can be a difficulty. But there are Catholic records that go back into the 18th century, not for every single parish. So it kind of then begins to depend on what has survived for the area of relevance. I would say, for the most part, hopefully you're going to get back to the first quarter of the 19th century, and then on some lines you'll be able to go back a little bit further. I will say Smith's a very common name in that area, and you might need to consider that they were McGowan at some point, which is the Irish version of that name.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think Diane had a question.
Yes, you might have answered this question already with the 15 miles. DNA relatives. Okay, and according to, let's see, the Shared Centimorgan Project, these DNA relatives would be relatives for a third great grandparent.
Okay.
The problem is their ancestor and my ancestors lived more than 15 miles apart.
Okay. Well, it's not. I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule of thumb. I've just giving it as an example, of course. You need to. Two things I would say when you're looking at people. Obviously, you've got a DNA match, but that's probably going to be a quite small DNA match at that level. So the things to consider there are, could they be related to you in another way that you don't know about? Is it definitely the line that you're both focused on, or could it possibly be something else? Or could there be more than one connection? Secondly, is the other person's research solid? Now, obviously we want everyone to be happy with their research, but some people we know they're a little bit less rigorous than we would like them to be. And so have you sort of looked into their research? I mean, obviously you're not going to say, I'm going to check your homework, but I want you to check their homework and see if they are right, because they could be wrong about something themselves. So that's just something else to consider there. And also then look into the historical context that I mentioned. Could there be a totally legitimate reason that someone did move a larger distance than we would generally expect? So I hope that's some pointers to go on.
Joyce Joyce has her hand up.
Okay, go for that, Joyce.
Hi, good morning, and thank you. So I've done quite a bit of research. My family is typically Northern Ireland, in the county of Tyrone, and also down. But when looking at the census records, many of the children say that they were born in County Clare, County Limerick. One was born in Scotland, and this is in the mid-1800s. And I'm not too sure what the reason would be for this family to move so much. His occupation was land steward, gardener, farmer at different times. And I wonder if you could offer any insight as to what might have had them moving all over the place. And I imagine in the middle of the fort, 1840s, the family went to Scotland because that was during the famine time, and they would have had, as the last name of Johnston, they probably would have had family in Scotland already. And
Maybe.
so, yeah, so I'm at a loss as to what all this movement was
Yeah.
about.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is the same thing I said to Diane, is it definitely all the same family, because that is an unusual movement pattern. Now that said, if someone was a land steward, that is a job that did involve moving, because you might get a job on the estate of Lord so-and-so down in Kerry, and you might go there and bring your family with you. So it might well be for economic reasons, but that is a lot of different places. And I would be checking, have I got enough corroboration that it is definitely the same family in each place? Or is it people who have similar names? That Johnson is a common name.
So
The moving to Scotland absolutely makes sense. In Northern Ireland and Ulster, people did hop over to Scotland, and even on a seasonal migratory level, they did. People will go over and pick potatoes and then come back and hop back over again the next season. So, you know, but it doesn't sound like though that your people were at that level of seasonal migratory work.
yeah, no, I don't think that they were back and forth all the time, but it is clearly the same family. We have marriage records and so on
Okay,
to
you're satisfied.
sort that out. It confused me, that's all. Thank you, though.
That is unusual. Yeah, I'm going to say that's very unusual. But if you're satisfied, I think then look into the job context of what they might be doing.
All right, thank you.
A few questions in the chat, which I'm just, Lacey is saying that Indiana is almost the same size as Ireland. There you go. There's a bit of perspective for Americans. So it's quite small, really. And also we're up much higher than people realize. You know, you look at the map and you kind of think, oh, Ireland's opposite New York. No, we're opposite Newfoundland and Canada. That's why it's so cold here and it rains all the time. Anne is asking tips on deciphering parish registers. They don't always use columns and the handwriting is difficult. It's practice is what it comes down to, and you just need to get used to it and just try, and if something is confusing, ask other people's opinion, but don't tell them what you think it says. That's crucial, because the minute you say, I think it says Lynch, that's the only thing the other person will say. But if you say, what do you think this word says, with no context, they have a much better chance of deciphering it. There are tools that will transcribe handwriting. There's one called Transcribus that I've heard is good, but I haven't used it myself. But really for me, it's just with practice. I see a different Anne asking me about tithe records and what other records would confirm they were the right person. So there wouldn't be any birth, death and marriage records for that period. There would be parish records. So you'd have to compare them with parish records. And the truth is, it would be difficult to be sure it is the right person. If they're in the same area, well, then that's a good start. But you have to consider what's the prominence of that name in an area. Jane is saying you've got your husband's ancestors who moved from Ireland to Liverpool and then Cheshire, and they came from Strabane, Tyrone. Okay, where would you start in taking this line back? So first of all, I would look at every census record for them in the UK for every single member of the family and go more than one generation with it. So not just the generation that emigrated, but the next generation and so on, to see, did anyone ever say anything other than just Ireland on the record? Oftentimes they will just say Ireland, but I have seen really great records that someone got into a more specific place. I was looking at a 1911 census the other day for people in London, and the couple were Irish, their children were born all in London, and they had written down Donaghy, County Clare and Limerick City as their places of origin when they were only supposed to write Ireland. And then they had really helpfully written what parish in London each of their children was born in as well. So they were obviously nice, precise people. You don't always get that. So the other thing is, don't forget the other people who were living with them. Could there be family members with a different surname who might put something else on their census return? Also, if they're Catholics, and I appreciate they might not be if they're coming from that neck of the woods, look at Liverpool has really great Catholic parish records on Find My Past, and they often will give more detail about the geographical locations of the people in those records. Patricia, you have got your hand up. Hello.
So getting back to the townland, so I'm still trying to figure out what is the best way when you don't know where the townland is to try to find one.
That is the $64 million question, isn't it? Well, you've got to do similar to what I just said to Jane. You have to look at every record that you have that you know is of the right people and see, does it ever say anything about where they came from in Ireland? And an obituary is a really good one there. Often I found a great obituary for someone who I liked for being the sister of one of my ancestors who emigrated, but I wasn't sure it was her. And then I got her obituary and it said that she came from Bruff in County Limerick. And I was like, aha, because it is not a common name, and that is precisely where I expected her to say she was from. So I didn't just accept it on that basis, but she went way up the rankings at that point. So I love obituaries, and if someone was in a small area that didn't have very many people, make sure you get the librarians of that town to help you, because with those people, they came from an island in California called Alameda, and I spoke to the librarians there, and they were like, "Oh, we've got some pictures of those people," and I was like, "No way!" They're like, "No, we have actual pictures of them," because it turned out they were like the second family in the town. You know, and then they said, "We've got some artifacts as well," and you know, so it was really helpful. So definitely this is a place where you need to get off the internet. You need to, I mean, it might start on the internet by sending an email to a librarian, but you know, make some phone calls, dig into the Catholic parish records in America, which are often not on the internet. But I had a client ring for me, because it was a terrible time zone difference, ring a church in St. Louis, where we knew a couple had gotten married, and we had their marriage license, but it didn't say any parents' names on it. And I said, ring the church and just ask them, because Catholics normally do know this town. Sure enough, they had both parents' names, the mother's maiden name and everything. But no one, and this man was in so many trees on Ancestry with different parents' names. No one had thought, let's ring the church and ask them. And so we know we have the right names now because we went that extra step off the internet. So, so be creative is what I'm trying to say. Also think about a headstone for someone. Sometimes headstones of immigrants say where they came from in another country. Okay, any other questions? Everybody knows everything now. I always make that joke, but I love it when no one says anything. I'm just like, oh, I've taught you everything. Go for it.
I think that's lovely. And if you'd like to hear more from Claire, we invite you to come to genealogicalstudies.com. And she is our Director of Irish Studies. We'd like to invite you to take classes with Claire because she is a phenomenal professor. And in addition, we've been able to answer lots of questions here. But something that you may not have thought of is that Claire is available for half-hour sessions. You can book one, you can book multiple with her. It is $30 USD, and you just book it right through our bookstore, which is genealogystore.com, or you can send an email to Angie@genealogicalstudies.com, or you can drop a note in the chat app, which is the very best way always to contact us, because it comes right to me. And that way I can coordinate an appointment between you and Claire, so you can get either some mentoring or some consulting, or really just ask the questions that are driving you crazy that you can't find the answer to, and she'll do her best to answer. But again, you will run into those $64 million questions. And help that in genealogical studies, that is just the way the animal goes. So again, genealogicalstudies.com. And Claire, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you very much for coming and giving up some of your Saturday afternoon / morning. I hope you've learned something today, and you can contact me through the school. You can also contact me through Twitter and Facebook. I usually use the handle CB Genealogy, my initials, and I know I don't have to spell genealogy to this crowd. And you know, I'm always available to answer a question on one of those platforms as well. But if you're thinking of taking classes, I'd love you to come and work with us. We have a super program, not just of Irish courses, but of course many other things. And we have DNA and so on. So I'm going to leave it at that and send you off to enjoy the rest of your weekend.
There was maybe one more question. Sharon,
oh, was there?
She popped her hand up, and
I thought she was doing clapping.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. So if there was a question, thank you so much. Okay, she's not popping back in, so it must have been a clapping, which I agree. You'll always get your money's worth when you take a class with Claire. So come on.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.